The Little Match Girl. On a bitterly cold winter's night, as snowflakes swirled through the streets of a bustling town, a little girl walked alone. Her dress was thin and tattered, offering no warmth against the biting wind. She had no shoes. She had started the evening with a pair, but one had been lost as she hurried across the street to avoid a carriage, and the other had been taken by a mischievous boy who had run off, laughing. In her small hands, she clutched a bundle of matches, the only thing she had left to sell. Her father had sent her out, telling her she must not return home until she had sold them all. But no one had stopped to buy any, and now, as the evening darkened and the streets emptied, she was too afraid to go home. She knew that if she returned with no money, her father would be angry. She wandered past houses where warm, golden light spilled out from the windows. Inside, families gathered around crackling fires. She saw children playing with new toys and mothers setting out steaming plates of food. The scent of roast meat and fresh bread drifted into the street, making her stomach ache with hunger. Cold and exhausted, she finally curled up in a small corner between two houses. The wind howled around her, and she could no longer feel her hands or feet. She had to find warmth somehow. Then she remembered the matches. With trembling fingers, she took one out and struck it against the wall. Whoosh! A tiny flame flickered to life, and suddenly, she saw a great iron stove glowing red with heat. The warmth wrapped around her like a soft blanket. She stretched out her hands, sighing with relief, but then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the flame flickered out, and the stove vanished. Desperate for warmth, she struck another match. This time, she saw a grand table before her, covered in a feast fit for a queen. A golden roast goose sat in the center, surrounded by steaming potatoes, fresh bread, and sweet cakes. The delicious aroma filled her nose, making her stomach rumble. She reached out for a piece of bread, but just as her fingers brushed it, the match burned out. The vision disappeared, leaving her in the cold once more. Shivering, she lit a third match. Before her eyes, a magnificent Christmas tree stood tall and bright, covered in golden ornaments and twinkling candles. She gazed at it in wonder, feeling as though she had stepped into a dream. Then suddenly the candles lifted into the sky, turning into stars that twinkled above her. She watched, mesmerized, until she saw one star fall, streaking across the sky like a golden tear. Her grandmother had once told her, "Whenever a star falls, a soul is going to heaven." The little girl smiled softly, remembering the warmth of her grandmother's embrace. But just as she was about to strike another match, she saw something moving in the street ahead. She blinked, unsure if it was another vision. A little boy, dressed in warm clothes, stood staring at her. He had curly hair and rosy cheeks, and in his hands he held a small lantern that flickered in the dark. "Are you cold?" he asked, stepping closer. The little girl nodded but said nothing. The boy hesitated, then took off his scarf and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Here, take this." She looked up at him, surprised. No one had ever stopped to help her before. "My house is just there," he said, pointing down the street. "Come with me. My mother will give you something warm to eat." The little girl's lips parted, but before she could answer, the cold bit at her again. Her hands trembled as she struck another match, and in its warm glow, she saw something even more beautiful than before. There, standing in the golden light, was her grandmother, the only person who had ever truly loved her. She looked just as the little girl remembered, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Grandmother," the little girl whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Take me with you, don't leave me behind." Afraid that her grandmother would disappear like the other visions, she struck the rest of her matches all at once. A brilliant light surrounded them, and for the first time in a long while, the little girl felt warm, safe, and truly happy. She took her grandmother's hand, and together they rose into the sky toward a place where there was no more cold, no more hunger, and no more loneliness. The next morning, as the sun rose over the snowy town, people found the little girl curled up in the corner. Her small hand still held the burnt-out matches, and on her face was a peaceful smile. Not far away, the little boy stood watching, his lantern flickering in the morning light. He wished he had reached her sooner, but in his heart he knew she was no longer cold. She had found warmth at last, in a place far beyond the winter's night. The end. This story reminds us to be kind to those in need and to always share warmth and love with those around us. Now close your eyes, little dreamer, and drift into a peaceful sleep. Good night.